War Thunder gave me money. You know, for a long time now, you've had people discussing, and when I say discussing, I mean screaming at each other about whether or not Minecraft's progression is any good. On one side, you have people who say that Minecraft is a sandbox, and therefore doesn't need in-depth progression or complex systems, and who can't play Tekken because the machines will give them a panic attack. And on the other side, you have people who think the progression is shallow, disjointed, and generally not Terraria. And as a certified centrist, I am both one of the most insufferable people on the planet, and can also see how wrong everyone is from atop my fence. Team Bootlicker likes to say things like, well, Minecraft is a sandbox. If you don't like something, just ignore it and play the game your way. That is until somebody mentions progression or RPG mechanics. Then suddenly, you don't understand the point of Minecraft and you're playing the game wrong. They act as if the progression is sacred and like it isn't the product of 15 years of hacked together systems. And that if you change it in any way, suddenly you need to fight biblically accurate Radon just to make a wooden pickaxe. Or that if you give more practical uses to things, that somehow goes against the spirit of the game.
No, you don't understand. The features having zero practical use and being ignored by 99% of the player base is actually a good thing.
Damn, that's cool. Hey, check out this 2-liter I filled with tannerite.
Oh.
But also, Minecraft doesn't need progression like Terraria to be good. A big part of Minecraft's appeal is its simplicity. It doesn't need to be super deep to be satisfying. At least that's what I tell my girlfriend. Progression in a game can be simple and rewarding. Minecraft just struggles with the second part. Fact is, the progression is made up of multiple disjointed systems that just don't play well off of each other, and that leads to the progression feeling very fragmented. In most games, the progression curve is relatively smooth, where the player gradually and consistently increases in strength. The problem with Minecraft's progression is that it's about as smooth as landing on a 737. The core of the issue is that players can easily blast through the early game, often literally within minutes, but then slam into a brick wall, where the progression plateaus and they make almost no vertical progress for hours. That is until the player hits the point where they're abruptly granted access to the best gear in the game. And a big contributor to this poor pacing is how unevenly spaced out the material progression is. Out of the 5 main materials, wood, stone, iron, diamond, and netherite, the player can easily get through over half of them within minutes of starting the game, and everyone is just oddly okay with that. Wood and stone barely even register on the timeline of a playthrough. I mean, the average player uses wood tools for what, a minute?
What is my purpose?
You mine 3 stone.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
And stone will only last a few minutes beyond that. You can easily spawn into a world, hop in a cave, and have iron within minutes of spawning. But then, the material progression completely stalls, and that same material you got within minutes of spawning ends up lasting for hours. Because the next upgrade is diamond, and it can take hours to fully switch off of iron, especially because players often wait to make the switch until after they can enchant it. At which point the player's strength explodes and they go from what is basically starting gear to the best equipment in the game in one move. I feel like we missed a few steps. Why are we going from gear you basically start the game with and upgrading directly into the gear you end the game with? It means that for 99% of your playthrough, you're only using 2 materials. Well, unless you count netherite, but you shouldn't because it's not an upgrade. We'll get more into it later, but netherite provides no practical benefit over diamond. It's just a status symbol. It's like a luxury SUV, or being on the flight log to Little St. James Island. So netherite is optional, but why not give us some options that don't suck? Especially because some of them are already in the game. I mean, seriously, we have chain and we have chainmail, but you cannot use chain to craft chainmail. Mojang's offices have to be filled with leaded exhaust fumes. There's no other way. I'm not sure why we have to find chainmail and can't just straight up craft it. It's not like it offers insane protection. And it would be a really easy change too. Well, it would be for any other developer. All they would need to do is make the chain recipe 2 per craft, and that would allow chainmail to act as a cheaper alternative to iron and give players a bit of choice early game. And sticking with the theme of early game choice, what if the player doesn't go mining immediately but still wants some protection? Well, then they can make leather armor. Except literally nobody does this. No one is going to spend 30 minutes hunting down every cow in a biome just to make the worst armor in the game, especially when it's objectively easier to get iron armor. But just like chainmail, there's actually a pretty simple solution. Minecraft already has rabbit hides, which are basically small pieces of leather, and can already be crafted into leather by combining 4 of them together. So, make the recipe reversible, rename rabbit hide to like leather scrap or small leather or whatever, and then craft leather armor out of those instead. Because if it only took 6 leather total, that might be worth it for some players. So, I had a section about why they should add copper equipment, but while wrapping this video up, Mojang announced that they're adding copper equipment. So that's a good few days work down the drain. Even when they do something right, they still find a way to fuck me over. But it is good that they're trying to give players more early game options. Granted, I'm not really sure how much use a lot of these items get because it's not like it's hard to get a lot of iron early on. Copper equipment and armor updates would mostly expand the game's horizontal progression, but it would just be nice if they were options. But you know, there could be an even better use for copper and equipment. A few of you may have noticed I haven't mentioned gold yet, and a lot of you probably didn't notice because you forgot gold was even an option. I forgot to until this point in the script. Gold has been a joke of a material for years because while it is the fastest and most enchantable, it only has 32 uses.
What the hell is even that?
Everyone knows gold is useless, but what if it could be used for something good? Like buying premium vehicles in War Thunder. Are you like me and think, man, I sure do wish there was more conflict in this world? China! Well, now you can bring the horrors of war home with War Thunder. War Thunder is the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made and is now available for free on PC, console, and mobile devices. Take command of over 2,500 tanks, planes, helicopters, and ships from 10 major nations, ranging from the biplanes and armored cars of the 1920s all the way up to the modern-day reasons we can't afford universal healthcare today. Immerse yourself into combat with realistic graphics, authentic sounds, and incredible detail, including X-ray models which give you an accurate view of your injuries, which the VA will still say are in fact not service-related. And unlike most of the AAA slop that can't hit 60 FPS on a supercomputer, War Thunder is actually well optimized. No joke, when I first got into PC gaming, War Thunder was one of the first games I played, because it was one of the only games that could run on my 2010 crap top. And as expected of somebody who's played for almost 12 years, I am very good at this game.
Watch your jet, bro. Watch your jet!
Join a worldwide community of over 70 million players in epic PvP battles today. New and returning players who haven't played for at least 6 months on PC or console will receive a huge bonus pack, including exclusive vehicle decorations, 100,000 silver lions, exclusive vehicles, and 7 days of premium account time by clicking one of the links in the pinned comment or description below. The first time I heard this idea was from System Z, and that's rose gold. By taking gold items to a smithing table and combining them with copper, you can make rose gold. Similar to copper, these items would be an optional step between two existing materials, this time iron and diamond. What makes this so perfect is that the biggest gap in material progression is between iron and diamond, where the players will get iron within minutes of spawning, but then will still be using it hours later until they can fully replace it with diamond. So rose gold can help smooth out the progression by giving players something to upgrade with while they slowly work their way to diamond. Plus, this works out perfectly with the loot you start to get in the mid-game, because the nether is filled with gold and gold accessories, which normally are a complete waste of space, but now you can take the gold items back to the overworld and turn them into useful equipment. And ruined portal frames, which currently have some of the worst loot in the game because it's all gold, can now provide players with an interesting gameplay experience by giving them early access to mid-game gear. The whole rose gold concept makes a painful amount of sense, which is why it's a shame that it'll never be in the game. Because we don't need your fancy materials or liberal ideas, because we got something even better. Gambling! Minecraft's late game progression is bad, and that's mostly because the enchantment system is genuinely fucking awful. There are two main ways to get enchantments, both of which basically boil down to gambling, which sounds awesome, but turns out having major gameplay progression locked behind RNG, actually not the best idea. The most obvious way to get enchantments is through the enchantment table, no shit. But this sucks for a multitude of reasons. When the player goes to enchant, they already know exactly what they want, but they don't just get to pick the enchantment, instead they have to gamble. They usually end up getting useless enchantments, or the enchantment they want but at a lower level, or they get one enchantment and nothing else, and maybe the player gets a few of the enchantments they do want. Then they have to decide if they should hold on to that item and make another to gamble for the rest of the enchantments, and then they have to combine them, or should they try to reroll the one they have, and then they have to deal with the ammo, too expensive. This is fucking stupid! I know exactly what I want! Why do I have to keep pulling this lever until I get lucky? And you know what really puts this system on the short bus? The only way to get enough experience is to use an XP farm. Yeah, of course, because you know what would really take this roller coaster of an experience to the next level? Sitting in a corner doing literally nothing for hours. And the XP system alone is a whole other mess. The average hostile mob drops around 6 XP. Getting to level 30 requires 1,395. That's well over 200 mobs. And even though enchanting only sets you back 3 levels, experience is exponential, meaning that going just from level 27 to 30 requires another 51 mobs. Even if you only enchant your armor and 4 basic tools, and even if you get insanely lucky and it only takes 2 attempts per item, that's still over 800 mobs. Plus ammo costs, that's easily over 1,000 mobs. There's no way you're doing that without an XP farm. The equivalent to enchanting in Terraria, and yes, I'm comparing Minecraft to Terraria, is modifiers. They add different effects to your items and you can pay to reroll them. But importantly, you can usually afford them with the money you gather just by playing the game normally. Whereas in Minecraft, experience is, in practical terms, a currency. But the thing you're supposed to purchase with it is so expensive that you're never going to be able to afford it without exploiting the game mechanics. But then once you do have a farm, it's too much of an overcorrection, and the cost of enchanting goes from unreasonably expensive to basically free. And because you can retry as many times as you want, it means that on a practical level, the only thing separating a good set of enchantments from a bad set of enchantments is just how long are you willing to let your computer run. And maybe I'm crazy, it's the reason I'm in your walls, but I feel like if a player can stand AFK in a room for hours and be rewarded with the best equipment in the game, something has gone critically wrong with your game design. But if for some reason you don't want to engage with this masterfully crafted system, you can always use the tried and true method. Slavery. Why is slavery always the answer in this game? We can't have fireflies because stupid children might try to feed them to a frog, but enslaving an entire people? Well, that's just good business. Right, Mojang, you spineless fuck? So now you get the wonderful task of cycling lecterns hundreds of times until you get all the enchantments you need. And similar to the enchantment table, it's incredibly tedious and boring. I was gonna say that, given the opportunity, players will optimize the fun out of a game. But that implies there's an alternative way to get enchantments. What are you gonna do? Find them all in structures? Yeah, good luck with that. You'd be more likely to find a stable career at Ubisoft. The random chance aspect made sense when enchanting was first introduced because players had to commit to whatever they got. I'm not saying that was a good system, but it made some sense. But now the game encourages players to get the best gear possible with rerolls and combining, but they never provided a good way to get each enchantment. And what makes this so much worse is the outsized role enchantments play in the progression, and how they monopolize basically all late game upgrades. All the enchantments basically fall into two categories: stat increases, like efficiency and sharpness, which simply make number go bigger, and effects like fire aspect and depth strider, which fundamentally change how an item performs. The real problem is with the stat increases, because they take the role of what should be material upgrades. And not only do they take them, but they completely eclipse the material progression. The mining speed of the 5 main materials ranges from 2 to 9. Efficiency 5 is worth 26! In mining speed, damage, and protection, enchantments just outclass everything. It's not even close. And the insane power of enchantments leads to other problems. It's the reason why netherite is useless. Basic netherite is better than basic diamond, beating it out in mining speed 9 to 8. However, because of the absurd bonus efficiency adds and the way that mining speed is calculated, efficiency 5 causes both materials to hit the soft cap in mining speed, meaning for literally 99% of blocks, there is no speed difference between diamond and netherite. Enchantments already push diamond to the limit of what's possible, meaning any material upgrades that come after that are basically redundant. Netherite was already an unnecessary addition, and even if Mojang wanted to add another new material, the current enchantment system makes it pointless. Enchantments just carry way too much weight. The importance of enchantments basically outweighs the importance of materials. And maybe it's the microchip talking, but I feel like in a game called Minecraft, the materials you mine and craft into tools should matter more than how much time you spend at the slots. Enchantment should be modifiers for equipment, and not the main source of power. There's a reason why so many people view the progression in 2 stages, before and after enchanting. Not only because the enchantments are so powerful, but because the majority of them can come from the enchantment table, it means that there is no intermediate step where the player will have some of the enchantments. You just all at once go from having none of the enchantments to all of the enchantments. And the fact that almost every effect, from fire aspect to depth strider, comes from the same RNG lotto is incredibly fucking lame and removes so many interesting possibilities. There are so many suggestions on how to improve it, but almost all of them require massive overhauls. Imagine if instead of gambling for every effect, they can instead come from items you find out in the world. Kind of like how it works for certain treasure enchantments, but expanded. Or if to get fire aspect, instead of wasting hours of your life cycling through menus, you can instead go to the nether, fight blazes, and using the blaze rods you collected, add fire damage to your sword. Or imagine if water temples weren't just massive fuck-off labyrinths with nothing in them except microplastics, but instead, massive fuck-off labyrinths that as a reward for clearing them, grant you access to depth strider or respiration, and microplastics by collecting the sponge inside and using it to modify your gear. Or what if instead of surrounding the enchantment table with generic bookshelves, you can instead surround it with different blocks that give players access to certain enchantments? The blocks can be a mix of new and existing options, like sponge granting access to water-related enchantments, and then maybe a new blaze rod block for fire aspect, and so on. Systems like these reward players for overcoming challenges and exploring the world, and it will be a lot more interesting than every effect being achieved through RNG and menu navigation. And collecting blocks is a lot more humane than collecting people, Mojang. The only problem is that this solution will never happen. Yeah, as much as the current system deserves to be old yellered, Mojang are completely incapable of making bold changes to the system, because they operate under the principle that any updates must be completely inconsequential, lest we accidentally upset anyone with a deep, unabashed love for random number generators. So it's highly unlikely that Mojang would gut the current enchantment system, but there could be a much more agreeable option. They could keep the existing enchantment system, while still introducing key items that grant access to specific enchantments. While this isn't the ideal solution, because the ideal solution involves a shotgun behind a barn, I think it's a fair compromise. It provides a consistent way to get enchantments, gives players new reasons to explore the world, and gives new purposes to underutilized features, while still allowing Mojang to teach kids the virtues of gambling and slavery. Minecraft's own 3/5 compromise. But I do like this option, not only because it can improve the enchantment system, but because it can also improve the structures, because the existing loopholes for structures are a fucking mess. Structures are a great idea that can reward players' curiosity and exploration, and having random rewards can introduce unique factors that keep the game feeling fresh. Generally, when a game wants to reward a player like this, it gives them something slightly above where they're currently at in the progression. That way it feels, rewarding. But this doesn't work particularly well in Minecraft. Because the progression has so few steps, it means the window for giving a player an appropriate reward for where they're at in the game is incredibly narrow. And what compounds this issue is Minecraft's nature as a sandbox. Structures can be found in any order, meaning that predicting what stage the player will be at is nearly impossible. What this results in is the loot from structures either being completely useless, or alternatively, way too good and shortcutting the already short progression. Shortcuts aren't necessarily a bad thing. In fact, they can be a great thing. I take a shortcut by driving the wrong way through the CVS parking lot all the time. Or like how in Dark Souls, if you know what you're doing, you can skip pretty big sections of the game and effectively play the game in the wrong order. It's a great way to reward experienced players for the knowledge that they have. The reason this doesn't really work in Minecraft is because there are so few milestones in progression, so it's possible for players to skip pretty big sections of the game based purely on how lucky their spawn is. In this world I made at random, I spawned in and could immediately see 2 villages and a temple with a 3rd village just over the hill. Within 20 minutes of spawning, I was already in the nether. I wasn't planning on doing this, I wasn't trying to speedrun. I spent about half the time climbing a mountain. The game just gave me everything I needed to skip straight to the nether. Randomly receiving rewards can be fun, but skipping this far into the game doesn't feel rewarding. And this happens because there's no rhyme or reason for what items appear in each structure. You'd think a structure being harder to find would mean it would have better loot, but it just doesn't. If I showed you these loot pools, ignoring a few obvious giveaways, can you even tell which is which and the order you'd likely find the structures in? You probably can't because nothing about these loot pools indicates how far into the game the player would likely be when they find them. I assume what happened is, because it's hard to predict this, Mojang just sort of averaged all the loot together and called it a day. That means that the loot in most structures is about at the level of the early to mid game, like iron and a couple of diamonds. But this is incredibly lame, lazy, and can seriously fuck up the early game progression. And once you enter the mid game, the loot itself becomes mid. While it's always nice to get iron and a few diamonds, as you progress further into the game, these become less and less impactful. And I know it's hard to predict how far a player would have progressed by the time they reach a structure, but Mojang didn't even fucking try. The Stronghold, a structure at the end of the game, can reward the player with iron gear. Does Mojang seriously think the average player is finding the Stronghold before they've made iron armor? And if not, why are they given as a reward? At this point in the game, these items are basically worthless. And the End City, the final structure at the very end of the game. You know what it can reward the player with? Iron. The same material that can be found within literal seconds of spawning. Yeah, that's a reasonable reward for beating the game. What is the point of giving players early game materials and equipment at the very end of the game? Especially because the same chest can spawn enchanted diamond. So the iron is made obsolete by items found in the same fucking container. It's the very end of the game. Logically, it should have the best gear, right? Well, no, because the strongest material is netherite, which doesn't come from the end of the game because that would make sense. Instead, it comes from the middle of the game. Why does the best material in the game come from the second dimension and not the final dimension? Am I fucking microwaved or does this loot progression make no fucking sense? Crazy idea. What if the loot from structures got better as the game progressed? And what if every single structure didn't share the same boring base loot pool? The goal should be to provide players with unique and useful items for each point in the game. The overworld structures are probably the hardest loot pools to balance. Because the early game is so short, it's hard to give items that are worthwhile rewards while not just launching the player straight into mid-game. For starters, the miscellaneous items are incredibly lame, like sand because we're in the desert, or bamboo because we're in the jungle. Amazing environmental storytelling. This is a creative game, right? So why not give us something to be creative with? Structures can be loaded with building blocks for the player, like pyramids having sandstone variants, villages having basic woods and stones, and jungles having napalm. Building blocks would be a great early game reward by helping players get started on shelter, and they'd still be nice later into the game, because sometimes it can be a real pain collecting certain blocks like mossy cobblestone. You know, unless you want to eat the building. But what about the valuables like iron and diamond? Finding diamond is supposed to be a really big achievement. It has an almost mythical status, but the fact that you can casually find them in a structure within minutes of spawning really takes away from that. And what makes this worse is that diamonds are so valuable that the game will usually only spawn 1 to 2 in a structure, which both ruins the excitement of finding your first diamonds, while also disappointing the player. Because what are you going to do with 1 diamond? Make a spade? Everyone hates spades. Diamonds just are not a good fit for the early game. They should not spawn in surface structures. Instead, they should be replaced by gold, and by extension, rose gold. These would act as a perfect early game reward. They're similar to diamond in that they're hard to come by in the early game, but unlike diamond, aren't so valuable that there can only be like 1 to 2. And assuming they don't gut the enchantment system, a fun idea could be, what if you could find low-level gear with enchantments? Imagine early game finding a stone pickaxe with efficiency or a copper axe with sharpness. And remember, enchantments are more impactful on worse materials due to the low base stats. A stone pickaxe with efficiency 2 is actually slightly faster than basic diamond. These items would be way more interesting than the ones we currently have. Right now, some structures can spawn some basic tools like normal iron, but these aren't particularly exciting because players can just craft the exact same tool at any time. But what players can't do early game is enchant, meaning these items would be super unique because the only way you could get them is if you find them. And once the players reach the mid-game, there's no real reason for structures to still be giving iron as a valuable reward, especially with the addition of rose gold. It can still appear, but it should be moved from the valuables loot pool to the miscellaneous loot pool. As for the structures, the nether fort should give a larger variety of gold items because that's likely what the player will be working towards at that time. Bastions are already pretty solid. They can give enchanted gold and diamond gear and the netherite template. The only real problem is how heavily weighted towards the garbage items they are. Like, can you imagine raiding a bastion and the best item you get is 6 golden carrots? And the ancient cities. Leggings and hose? Really? Swift sneak, haha, you gotta sneak around. Fuck you. Give players all the diamond options and remove the dead on arrival iron. And moving into the endgame, it's tricky, because the best material is netherite, which is obviously a nether exclusive, meaning the material progression really peaks in the mid-game. But come on, basic iron from the stronghold? Really? This is basically the end of the game. This should absolutely be enchanted diamond. And finally, the end city chest being clogged up with iron is disgusting. It's the very end of the game and so should give the very best loot. It should be enchanted diamond, books, golden apples, the works. Of course, you do also get the elytra, which is a fitting reward because it is the best item in the game and one of the very few milestones in player progression. And it would be great if they added more items like the elytra. Take a cue from Terraria and add items that fundamentally expand the player's abilities. Maybe an item that lets you permanently run faster, or one that lets you jump higher, or maybe one that lets you place blocks further away. Actually, that last one is stupid. Why would you ever want that? You know what would be even better? How about another passive mob that doesn't fucking do anything? And I know when people talk about fixing the progression, what they usually mean is to add a bunch of stuff. You can speculate all day on the things that they should add, but what we already have could also be significantly improved, and with relatively little effort. With the exception of the enchantment system, because the only real solution for that is buckshot. Most of these aren't really massive changes. A few new items, yes, but it's mostly tweaking things that already exist. And I know a lot of the purists will say that nothing needs to change and that everything is fine how it is, but they always say that when change is suggested. Then the change gets added, they shut up, and then they move the goalposts, and then the next new thing becomes a threat. But it's hard to argue that there's no need for change, especially when something like the enchantment system is so universally hated, and the fact that there's a whole genre of videos on YouTube now dedicated to trying to make Minecraft fun again. What's funny is a common piece of advice they often give is to play the game slower. The reason why this can feel like a more satisfying way to play is because by dragging out the early stages of the game, you can artificially smooth out the progression curve. And while this might work for some people, the solution doesn't scale well. You can't expect every single person to play the game at an artificially slow pace. That's just not realistic. The normal pace of progression should just be satisfying. And I've heard people argue that if you change the progression or add new RPG mechanics or add new endgame content, that might alienate people who aren't interested in that sort of thing and who just want to build. And that these changes might make the game more difficult, which could lock people out from using certain things. First of all, it's fucking Minecraft. It's not going to be that difficult. But the justification is that sandbox elements can be easily accessed by anybody. But what's that worth if nobody engages with them? In general, I feel like the sandbox crowd severely overestimates how large they are. The average player does not give a shit about a few new blocks and another passive mob that doesn't do anything. Hell, a lot of people don't even know these things exist, because when they're added, there's zero hype around them. Outside of the sandbox crowd, nobody cares. I can guarantee you that more people would engage with new endgame or progression-based content than have ever built with something like mud blocks. And if you really hate it that much, just ignore it, right? That's what you guys always say when we point out how useless something is. And if all you want to do really is build, and you don't want to be bothered with progression at all, there's actually a pretty simple solution. You can play creative. And War Thunder. Remember to click the links in the pinned comment or description below. New and returning players who haven't played for at least 6 months on PC or console will receive a massive bonus pack, including an exclusive vehicle decoration, 100,000 silver lions, exclusive vehicles, and 7 days of premium account time. And also, shout out to the patrons and members. You guys are fucking lunatics, but I appreciate it.